I'm Dr. Susan Phoenix. I live on the south coast of England after living in Europe, in France and Spain for 20 years. I've just gone back to my homeland, I suppose. I have worked holistically in psychology for many years now. I started off as a psychologist for deaf children and their families as a bit of a campaigner in Northern Ireland. I now work in a more energetic medicine way because as troubles come into your life, you change your path. Almost 25 years ago now, my husband was killed in a helicopter crash in Northern Ireland. He was a counter-terrorist officer helping his community come towards peace, and the helicopter that he was in, which was a twin-bladed Chinook, went down on the Mull of Kintyre in Scotland, and everything changed from then on. We had been a loving family, and we have 2 children. We lived in the countryside. I worked with a lot of charities in Northern Ireland, and suddenly everything went wrong, or right, as the case may be, according to divine purpose. And I had to review my whole life. But I did because the night that he died, he came back to me. He died at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a Scottish mountaintop across the water. And I went to bed. My children and I both went to our beds, and at 6 o'clock in the morning I felt this wonderful energy all around me. It was warm, it was loving, it was surprising because I was in deep grief and shock. When I do my workshops I say it's orgasmic because everybody laughs, but it was that feeling. It was beautiful. And I thought, why am I feeling this? My husband's dead, he's just lying across the water on a Scottish mountain. My daughter came down the stairs. She was 26 at the time, and I said, "Did you sleep, Nicola?" And she said, "No, but at 4 o'clock this morning I felt this wonderful feeling." And then my son, who had just become an Air Force pilot, a military pilot, he came down, and I said, "Niven, did you sleep?" And he said, "Oh yes, I did, but sure, you know, my dad would know I wouldn't wake up for anything." So my very, very scientifically based son put his finger on the fact the energy we had felt was his father. And it was. From that time on, I started talking about it and telling people, this energy, you know, it's very amazing. And I saw their faces looking at me and going, yeah, the widow's gone mad, forget it. And so I decided I wouldn't share it. But then I got on and did the business that I had expected my husband would have expected me to do. I wrote his life story. It became a bestseller about his life as a counter-terrorist officer in Northern Ireland. I was hounded by MI5 and MI6. I moved to France to escape all of that. And then, after I'd done the business, I became seriously depressed, suicidal. No one believes it now, looking at me before or after. And I went down the emotional tubes. Well, the first book was his life story. I was completing his work because it was a high-profile death, if you like. He died on the Mull of Kintyre, as I say, with 29 other people in this Chinook. And it was all highly controversial, and the British government were all in denial, and they tried to blame the pilots, which they did for 2 years. So it was a book waiting to be written, and it was his work. So I did that, and it became a bestseller. And here we are, several years on, nearly 20 years on. It's still selling in Kindle because people want to know the story, an Irishman's story. And it was voted at the time with one of the high newspapers as the most balanced story to come from the Northern Ireland Troubles, because my husband was an Irishman. He didn't fit any of the stereotypical ideas at that time when Catholics and Protestants were fighting in the name of whatever they were fighting. So it was a good story. I know it was because it was his. And I wrote it with Jack Holland, who was living in New York at the time, and he was a well-balanced journalist. So it was a story I had to do. And then I just got on with life. As I say, I was living in rural France. I was meeting beautiful people who were living with the earth. They grounded me, French farmers and their families. They were really very, very supportive. And people started asking me, but how did you survive? How did you not take drugs or turn into an alcoholic or whatever? I have to say I do love very good wine and champagne, but never to excess. Well, no, never to excess. And they taught me about real life in France. So then I decided, well, I'll write my life story, and that was the second book about how I survived, and it was called Out of the Shadows. My husband's book was called Policing the Shadows, so he was Ian Phoenix, Policing the Shadows, and mine was Out of the Shadows, A Journey Back from Grief.